Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Tell Your Story. I'm your host, Todd Nesloni, and each week I look to bring you a different guest who has encouraged, inspired, or challenged me in one way or another and bring them on to share some of their story in hopes that it inspires you to tell some of yours. I'm thrilled for this week's guest. We've got Joe on with us. Joe, kind of tell everybody who you are and what you do.
Hey, thanks for having me, Todd. My name's Joe Vercellino, and I'm here in Detroit. This is where I live. This is where I teach. This is where all my favorite people are. And I'm an elementary music teacher here in Detroit, going into my 10th year teaching. While we're recording this, we're in the midst of the COVID season, virtual teaching, all that. We're coming off of Martin Luther King Day. And I've been teaching here for about 10 years. And I think what sets me apart as a teacher is we have a really creative classroom focused on songwriting and the development of kids, their personal development, their character, them as artists. But I don't really have much of a line between my classroom and my home life. So a lot of my students are involved in the natural rhythms of my life, spending time with my own kids, reading them stories before bed, sharing holidays. And so my classroom and my life are kind of the same thing. So
I love that. Well, Joe, whenever I start these conversations, I love to kind of start back at the beginning. And that is, when you were a kid, dreaming of what you were going to be when you got older, does it align at all with the work you're doing now?
It does. I had a friend say to me one time that was like, what you were interested in when you were like 2 and 12 somehow correlates with what you're doing right now. I don't know if there's like actual research behind that, but it made me think back to what I was really into. And man, I have been into music my whole life. For as long as I can remember, I've always been fascinated with sound. Banging on things and hear what they sound like, creating rhythms. I remember being just a tiny little person and putting my head up next to my parents' stereo, listening to music and being like, I'm going to come out of this someday. And when I was in high school, I was a street musician. So the idea of creating special musical moments with not a lot of resources, but seeing the way that music affected people was really interesting to me. And then lastly, my experience in school, mostly in high school, all of my best friends, my community, my closest relationships with teachers who had an impact on me, they were all in the music sphere. So I had an idea that I maybe would become a teacher, but I really just knew two things about myself. I knew that I loved music, like anything having to do with music, playing it, writing it, or the people who were around it. I knew I loved music, and second, I knew that I loved kids. So just being able to fuse those together, like that's what a teacher would be. So I get to be around music, creating music all the time, and I get to be around kids. So,
well, I've got to ask. You mentioned you were a street musician. What was your instrument of choice?
So I started playing on the street just with my guitar. And I knew one song. I knew how to play and sing one song, and I had not like sung publicly or anything. I remember sitting kitty corner to like the corner in my town where I grew up. I grew up in mid-Michigan, and there was this pizza place and all these people sitting outside, and I was sitting like kitty corner to that, playing my one song. I was so scared to go across the street because I was like, what if these guys reject me? And because they don't like my voice or they don't like the song. And I remember this couple walking by, and I didn't even have my case open. Like, that's how afraid I was of being rejected. I didn't even want to give them a chance to not put money in. And I remember them putting a couple quarters at my feet and saying, like, you're pretty good. You should open up your case. And that's all it took for me. I opened up my case. I went across the street, and I have been singing and creating music in moments with people ever since. So
I love that so much. Well, Joe, you said you were a music teacher now, and before we even get into what that even looks like during times of a pandemic, I'd love to kind of back up just a little bit and when I became a principal, my eyes were really opened to the instrumental role our auxiliary teachers play on the campus. And not only that, but how much goes into their daily job that typical classroom teachers don't see or don't comprehend. I mean, a lot of times, and I was guilty of it when I was a classroom teacher as well, was thinking, oh, well, the PE and music and art teacher, they have the best job. They just get to play all day. And then when I became a principal, I was like, whoa, there is a lot that goes into those jobs and the amount of kids you see and work with and everything. And so for educators who might be listening today who have never experienced being a music teacher, what would you say is probably something that most people don't realize goes into the work you do?
Well, first off, one of the things that I love about being a music teacher or any teacher in the arts is that we have the privilege of being with kids through so many stages of their development. Even if you're only elementary or only middle school or only high school, I work with kindergarten all the way through 8th grade, and then there's a lot of students that I stay involved with through high school. But being able to have a student that you start teaching in kindergarten and you're with them through their experience developing as a person, as an artist, as a musician, like all the way through 8th grade, like it's 9 years. And that's the first thing that I would point out, is that it's really just a privilege to be able to be in a role where you see the same kids year after year after year, because you don't get that when you're like a 3rd grade teacher, 4th grade teacher. And then the other thing is, my class is an opportunity for kids to express. Everyone has got a story, everyone has got an experience, and one of the staples of my classroom, we're in Detroit, we're in an inner city school, we don't have a lot of resources, but when people hear the music that comes out of our classroom, about 95% of what we sing, the music that we put out on YouTube, Apple Music, Spotify, from my classroom, we write it ourselves. And so my classroom is an opportunity for kids to express themselves. And, in a time where like 1 in 8 kids are struggling with anxiety, it's so important for students to have a place where the shades of their personality and their experience have an opportunity to come out onto a canvas. So whether that's a recording track or painting, kids need to express. If we don't express, the only other option is repressing. And, we repress our emotions, our experiences, and they end up coming back. It's kind of like shoving down a beach ball, like underwater, like it always pops up. So I like that my class is an opportunity to allow students to express. So in their songwriting, in our performances, and their singing, it's really powerful stuff.
Well, it's so funny you share all that, because now we're in a pandemic. And so your typical day of getting to hang out face to face with these kids and see them all and everything probably looks a little different. And I know as classroom teachers, we know how we're going to shift our learning and move to Google Classroom, but I'm sure it looks completely different for a music teacher. So how has the pandemic affected the way you are instructing students?
Ooh, man. Well, I put a lot of effort, especially early on in the pandemic when we became virtual teachers, and no teacher that I know has gotten into the profession because this is how they want to be teaching. There is no substitute for being in the same room, being, eye to eye with your students. Zoom can't capture that, but, and music is so relational too, the whole experience of singing together, like even with like the latency and delay, like, there's no opportunity for me to sing together with my students. And that alone is really tough. But what I've actually found with my students right now is that my Zoom calls, even though like we just came off of Martin Luther King Day and we were doing a lesson on Lift Every Voice and Sing. It's the Black national anthem that a lot of people don't know about, by James Weldon Johnson. Even though we're singing it together and we can't all hear each other, one thing that I know that my students value is that at the end of our calls, even though I have another class I need to go to, they say, can we just stick around? Can we just stay here on the call? Because kids more than ever just want to feel a sense of community. They want to feel a sense of belonging. So a lot of my Zoom sessions with my students now are primarily focused on belonging, community, relationships, connection, and then the music standards are second, and like a significant second below that. So I want my students to leave these Zoom calls knowing that they've been seen, that they're valued, that they have worth, even if it's just for 30 minutes. And then hopefully we'll be able to hit a couple music standards too.
Now, in addition to all the work you're doing with kids and education, you also run a nonprofit, don't you?
I do, yeah. I have a lot of my students are part of it, actually. The after school program is called Shiloh Detroit, and it's another place of belonging for kids. It's faith based, and we also partner with kids to be able to take independent steps in their life that they may maybe their parents haven't had the opportunity to be able to take. So helping kids through driver's training, segment 1, segment 2, driving hours. I've had my own students scrape up my own vehicles just to be able to get to that license, taking kids to start their first bank accounts, helping students create resumes, get and keep their first jobs. I'm referring to like a lot of our older students that are part of Shiloh Detroit. But I also, another part of Shiloh Detroit is something called the Lionheart Experience. And so I travel around with my students who are my students. They're part of Shiloh Detroit, so the after school program. And they're also part of this other traveling group that I do, that it's really like my inner circle. The kids who are part of the Lionheart Experience are involved in my home life frequently. And we travel around and we use dance, hip hop, spoken word, painting, live painting, and then I speak, and we talk about identity and purpose. Our goal is to infuse young people with identity and purpose in schools. And so we've seen about 60,000 kids. We travel for 25% of the year, and we're in school. It's kind of like our roots there for the rest of it. And being able to share a platform with my students that's not just in my school, but that actually gets out there to schools all over the Midwest and tour around, like, it really is a dream come true, because I get to be a teacher, but I also get to experience this public life with my students, right, where we have the opportunity to be able to reach out to other kids who are struggling with their identity, kids who are struggling with hopelessness, or and be able to speak into their lives, just let them know that they're seen, that they have worth, that they have a purpose.
Well, I love listening to you because you're such a clear example of somebody who is following their own passions and really and pouring themselves into something they love. But I've got to ask this, because I know people listening are going to hear this and go, okay, he does all this amazing stuff. How does he balance all the great work that he's doing and still have a positive, successful, stress-free home life?
That's a great question. That's a great question.
Because I know none of us are perfect in that. Nobody is. But how do you make it work?
Well, I would say that for the last, let me see. I've been teaching for 10 years. I've been married for 6 years, and we just had our third child, my wife and I. And I would say that over that time, there's been periods where I have lived a really balanced, full life, where I feel great at home, I feel great in my marriage, feel great with my kids. And there's times that I haven't. Like, I just came out of a season where this was about like 6 months ago, and I was like, I don't think that I'm okay. I don't think I'm okay. Like, I could just feel something inside of me. I was like angry, irritated, but not like an explosive one, like the kind that you just only feel deep down. And so I started going to therapy, and he was like, you're depressed, you have anxiety, and you've probably had it for a long time. And so it's been a really interesting experience for me, because over the last 4 months, I go and see this person who I'm so glad that they exist, but their whole role is to help me realize what motivates me, what some of my core fears are and how they relate to the decisions that I make as like a teacher, or what I pursue, what I commit to. And so the truth is that my classroom and the blend of my classroom and my family has both led to the most life for me, and it's led to the most like imbalance and stress. So it's really, yeah, I mean, I don't really know another way to put it outside of that. Like it's this thing that you hold on to as a teacher where you're like, wow, this is the most amazing thing in my life and the most stressful thing in my life.
Yeah, I was gonna say
Somehow we
everybody
continue.
listening right now will totally be able to relate with you because we all walk that same line of finding out where our balances are, and then sometimes, like you said, feeling completely imbalanced, and you're like, "I've got it, like I'm rocking everything," and all of a sudden you're like, "Whoa, never mind, now it's totally off kilter again." So
Yeah.
I love that you shared that because I think that's so real and genuine, and people are really gonna connect with that. And so, as we wrap this up, Joe, one question I always love to end these conversations on is, I believe as people, there are things we hold true to who we are and are part of our core belief system. And so for you, knowing people are listening today, and if they only walk away with one thing, what is your one thing for our listeners?
Well, I'm sure that a lot of your listeners are coming from, experience in school, or their teachers themselves. And so much of our profession is just around the idea of enduring. Being a teacher, like we're in a profession where like half of teachers will quit in the first 3 years. And in a context where I teach, in a school, in a demographic, in the city where I teach, where kids are used to people being in and out of their lives, um, just the power of enduring and the power of staying and sticking with it, sticking in that friendship, sticking in that marriage, sticking in that classroom. There is a lot of power that just comes out of, I'm going to show up. I'm going to show up here. And I know that things aren't perfect. I'm going to show up in this relationship. I'm going to show up in my classroom, and I'm going to endure, because I know that my wife and I always say, not just with ourselves and our relationship, but with our friends and my classroom, that our best days are ahead. Maybe not the easiest
Mm,
days,
yeah.
but the best days are ahead. So for anyone who's listening and you're struggling, I would say, hey, like stick with this. You can make it. Your best days are ahead. You can endure.
I love it. Well, Joe, thank you so much for being a guest on Tell Your Story today. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And thank you, everybody, for joining another episode of Tell Your Story. Remember, you can check out past episodes anywhere you get your podcasts or video. It's there. I hope today's conversation with Joe has encouraged you to get out there and tell your story, because every story matters.